Fredo and I think we were talking about Star Wars or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
let's talk about that again.
No, I don't want to go back down the Star Wars rabbit
Wow.
trail.
Star
I would
Wars
rather go
is
down the B
good.
movie. Like,
Okay, tell us why you love the B movie.
Yeah,
McDay.
please.
I did not say I love the B movie.
You said it was in your top 5 all time.
You said it
No, I
had
did
your
not.
favorite Jerry
Okay.
Seinfeld quote in it.
Yes, that I did say.
You
I
said
did not
Jerry
say it was.
Seinfeld is one of my heroes, and this has my favorite quote.
That's a loose paraphrase of what I said, with maybe more or less words, but just you like jazz. It was like the setup of it. Again, there's just this weird tension between a bee and a female that, as a kid, was like, okay, funny. As an adult, you're like, DreamWorks, what were you thinking as you put together this movie?
Mhm.
And it's been picking up traction on TikTok again, like just the ridiculous things that happen in DreamWorks films.
What's TikTok?
And they've been talking.
I'm just kidding.
Scott, I know you are our resident
This is-
associate sage, but
Honestly,
you
this is a big episode, right?
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. It is the app that is stealing all of your data and selling it online.
Although I think some of my favorite like accounts on like TikTok or pretty much any social media are the really old people.
Mm.
Like they're just my favorite people to watch and engage with.
There's Techno Grandpa that I follow,
Ooh.
where it's a elder gentleman, probably north of 65 years old, that just dances to the latest and greatest techno hits. And it's so entertaining. I'm like, I want to be as cool as this guy when I reach that age. Chat, hello, welcome. This is chapters 8 and 9, the final episode in our virtual book club on Fathered by God. We have reached the end of our book. This one felt like a little bit more of a power through. Just trying to honor everybody's time. A lot of reading. I'm fully caught up, so woohoo. But today I am joined by Scott, our lovely chat contributor, is now my co-host today.
Yeah, somehow I made it out of the chat.
Wow, you've been upgraded.
Hopefully the chat can carry the weight of all the honestly great questions. This is gonna be an affirmation moment. Scott, you ask great questions that really leads me and all of our viewers into deep reflections on our time together. So thank you for the work that you do.
Yeah, happy. I'm gonna randomly select someone from the chat to take on the mantle. Let's see who's commented so far.
Wow.
Brian, Morgan.
Hello, Brian. Hello, Morgan. Welcome in. Scott, how does it feel to now be in the hosting seat? Is it a different sense of power?
Yeah, I feel like I could ask Zach anything and he has to answer. He has to pretty much do anything I say at this point.
Wow.
Definitely.
Scott's
I feel that.
Boss.
We are also welcoming Zach, our team's resident sage. He is by far the oldest person on our team.
Part of the ancient.
Naturally. What's that?
I said, and oldest person I know.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that. Zach, what was it like when the Romans fell and the empire started to fall apart into ancient Europe?
Yeah, that was cool. I think it was when I discovered fire that things really started to pick up,
You can't make fire jokes, dude. All of Southern California is in flames right now.
Oh, yeah.
Bad timing.
Yeah.
Bad timing. Zach, thank you for jumping on here. I love to make fun of you. You're very much so much older than I, so naturally I see you as a sage in my life. Can you give a quick and brief overview of what you do for Sandals Church?
Ooh, yeah. So I have the pleasure of leading our technology, software development, and digital media teams here at Sandals Church. Been around this place been working here for around 9 years.
Wow. So long.
Forever.
So when you first started, we had like not even a building, right?
Yeah, we were using tin cans and string to call people, like that's how far back we go.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Hello, Elena. Hello, Danielle. Everybody, we are jumping into, like the title suggests, chapters 8 and 9, the Sage chapter, and then the ushering of all of our young men and men in the church to initiate and start living out these stages of life that we're in. Since we've kind of reached the end of the book, guys, what are some of your overall thoughts, experiences with Fathered by God, John, and how we've been traveling through this book together?
You want to go first, or I'm going to jump in?
Go for it.
I would say first and foremost, the thing that I feel when I read through this book, and I've read through this book multiple times, I'm just so grateful for my own father.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who he was in my life and how many of these things he did right and did well. So yeah, just a lot of gratitude, to be honest with you, is how I feel. It's like, wow, I feel like he did initiate me in so many ways and trusted me and fed into me that I have what it takes to be a man. And so, Dad, if you ever watch this, thank you.
This is a good litmus test if he actually does watch it.
I won't tell him about it.
Since you've read and or listened through this several times now, was there anything new you took out of this book that maybe hit you differently from previous times of going through this? Because obviously you're reading at different stages. So
I think different times I've associated more with different stages. I think the first time I read this book, I was probably more cowboy. And I think there was another time where I read it and I felt very much like the warrior. And I would say this time through, I actually really appreciated a lot of the chapter of the lover. And I just feel like some of those things coming out more with me now. And so, yeah, I appreciate the truth in all of the chapters and segments. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Thank you, Scott. Zach, what about you? What is your overall experience with this book?
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I definitely think it brings out just kind of a level of gratefulness, both for the sages that I have personally had in my life, like my dad or my grandpa or others. But also like, I have kids now, they're 3 and 5, and it's, I don't know, it just makes you think a lot about, like when I first read this book, it was easily 10 years ago, maybe longer than that. And so you're thinking a lot about, okay, like, at least at that point in my life, the warrior stage, the lover stage. And now I think a lot about like, okay, like with my son, like what am I doing right now? And how am I preparing myself? How am I preparing him? I mean, he's little, he's 5, but it's like, what am I doing to prepare me, my heart, my family to set him up well in the future? I would say just, it makes you think a lot more about that than maybe you have thought about in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
What about you? Like, I know this is your first time reading it. What's been like the maybe biggest takeaway you've had from it?
Yeah, definitely. Before I jump into that chat, as you guys are watching this, we would love to hear your thoughts as well. So feel free to drop those in so we can hear how this book has been experienced by you guys.
Yeah.
I think I resonate a lot with what Zach was saying. Zion is now 5 months old, a little over 5 months.
Wow.
And we'll get into this later, but one of the lines at the end of the books, John is kind of talking about sometimes these stages just get handed to you and sometimes you could step into them. And while I feel like I stepped into this new stage of maybe lover, king, or not lover, but maybe king, I also feel like I got kind of pushed into this new initiation of being a father and what that is like. So it has definitely brought a new awareness to me of, first off, what are some things I really need to start doing the work on to heal myself? Be more aware of some of the woundings I've had before, and then maybe start looking at some of the woundings I haven't been paying attention to, if there are any. And just start doing the steps there to make sure that I am, kind of like you both are saying, in the best heart posture and position to serve my son well and to initiate him in those many different stages of life. And on a deeper level, on another level, it's making me think of my future kids, to see them all as unique individuals. I hope to also have a daughter one day. So this is also kind of giving me the framework of like thinking through, okay, my daughter's going to be her own unique individual and I have to love her and help her grow up in a different way that is called for my son. So just thinking through those, and like, even now, Zion's not going to have tons of memories at 4 and 5 months old, but starting to build those practices and those routines for my family to kind of help build up spaces for that. So, yeah. Morgan already jumped in with a question. She said, "Curious." She's taking your role. I like it. I feel like there's a good back and forth between you and Morgan, Scott.
Yeah.
You guys kind of.
There's someone I wanted to take the mantle. It was Morgan.
So. Yeah. Morgan asks, "Curious for each of you, who are some people that have struck you as sages? What has their impact been? / what have you observed in them?" I'll start with Zach first, since Scott answered first on the last one.
Wow. Yeah, I think about Eldritch. He kind of describes like two types of sages. It's kind of like the people you know, and then kind of like maybe some of the people you've sat under the teaching of. And so like in that kind of second camp, I think about maybe Tim Keller, like, and just how many of his books and his teachings and the work that he's done has just really had a dramatic effect on my faith. So that's kind of like one. And I think about maybe the sages that I know that have been in my life, certainly my dad, and then my grandpa, who just turned 90 this year, who by God's grace is still with us. I just had lunch with him. Was it last week or the week before? And just how his faithful example has made me just not only grateful for his life and work and the raising of my mom and all of his kids, but just I just have fond memories. I'm the oldest grandchild, and so I have a lot of fond memories just going to his house, and whether it's us chopping down a tree or him sending me off on his riding lawnmower, or us going to church together, like whatever that was. Just how he kind of brought me through some of those stages. So for me, those are the people that kind of like come to mind initially. There have been other folks too, whether it's, there's been a college professor that comes to mind. There have been some folks that I have worked with that have come to mind, that through various stages of my life that I've kind of like really looked up to help me through that place in my life, or learn from, or really kind of like aspire to be like.
Yeah, similarly to you, Zach, I think that I have multiple stages in my life currently, and I've had different stages in my life through different times. I mean, first and foremost, my dad has taught me so many things, and he's someone that I still go to with things. And so he's one in my life. I think of some teachers I've had along the way. I had actually a math teacher that I looked to for a lot of wisdom in high school. His name was Mr. Falk. I went to a private school, so I had a Bible teacher. His name was Mr. Burdett. These are people that I just would go to and get wisdom from, and they cared for me. And like, it wasn't just a transactional thing either. Like they wanted good things for me. And then like moving along, like getting into ministry, I had a mentor and pastor. His name was Paul, and he taught me so much in some of the mid stages, I would say, of like warrior. And then even now, like my boss who's in the chat, his name's Brian. Like, he's someone that I feel like so many of my conversations are, how do I navigate this complex situation that I've never been in before? And he always comes in with wisdom or a new way to think or how he interprets it. And so he's just someone that I really appreciate. And he's someone that I'll even go to with like personal stuff in my life, like, hey, this thing's going on, like how would you handle this or navigate this? And so he's someone that I definitely see as wise and sage-like in my life.
Yeah, it's crazy that Zach is older than all of our bosses. That's just so wild.
It's a mystery.
But definitely, I've said this before on past streams. My dad and my grandfather are both now people that I see as sages. My grandpa definitely, and it's cool to see my dad now step into the sage-like stage, especially as my brother and I start having kids, and I'm sure my sister somewhere down the line as well. So it's cool to kind of see him transition from one stage into the next. But people outside of like my immediate sphere, I'm in the same boat. Tim Keller also was a huge shaping voice in my life, in my early Christian walk. He's someone I look forward to. And then even reading like N.T. Wright and A.W. Tozer, some of that stuff. We were all just in a conference earlier today. John Mark Comer is someone who, I don't know if he would consider himself a sage, but is someone that I've looked to for wisdom and guidance and stuff like that. This one may be a little bit of a stretch, but I do, because it happened yesterday. James Earl Jones passed away. And even some of the characters that we could play, like the book gets into different characters in books and films and stuff like that.
Yeah.
James Earl Jones, like his passing struck me a little bit because he played two very big voices in my childhood of, Darth Vader and Mufasa. So
yeah,
even the characters we read and interact with or watch can kind of be some of those things, whether they are good or evil. Darth Vader had his own journey.
Going to Darth Vader for some advice, or
hey,
tells you a lot about
sometimes
McKay. Yeah.
I don't know. The Empire wasn't totally wrong. It's just all I'm gonna say. But it's that's we can kind of get into the actual chapter now. But that's one of the things I loved about chapter 8 and the Sage chapter. John 1 was writing from a place of like, hey, I'm not yet in this stage, so this is some reflections on what I think is happening. But I'd love to have a discussion on kind of like how as young men do we start to look and find the sages we need in our lives. Because on the one end, I remember being a new Christian, and the fear of asking or the fear of not knowing can kind of lead me to not seek that wisdom out, even though I'm like desperately wanting it. I don't know if I had a question formed in there, but what do you guys think about the task of our roles to seek out the sage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that similar to John, like we're all probably in like the warrior, lover, king-ish eras. So none of us are probably truly sages, as he describes. But like Scott mentioned, we might all play that role in someone's life. I think that under the section where he talks about what does it offer? What does he offer? And I think one of the key points for me is he talks about whatever counsel he offers, he draws you to God, not self-reliance. Because so much of what it seems like is in culture is, super maybe like results driven, or like life hacks or tips, or, what have you. And, it's where it's in a couple pages before that, he talks about how, it's expertise driven. And there's certainly value in that. Like there's certainly value in expertise, learning things, becoming great at something. But the wisdom that the sage offers is counsel that draws you closer to God, not on self-reliance, which I thought was just yeah, who are those people in my life that are drawing me to God and not self-reliance?
Yeah.
I think that's the litmus test for like, who am I going to go to talk about things? I do have older people in my life that I don't go to for advice or counsel. And it's because in the times I have talked to them, it's been about themselves or their own thing or whatever, any number of things it could be. And it's like, okay, they don't seem to have the same focus that I want in my life. And so it's not who I'm going to necessarily go to for advice. So I think that's the litmus test. But I think before that, I mean, you have to seek it out and, go out on a limb and make asks. And part of that is realizing that you're not alone in your experiences or your feelings, because sometimes we feel like, oh, no one would understand, or no one's been through this thing that I just went through, or and so like we isolate ourselves and we never ask the question, when in reality, most likely so many people around us have similar experiences and things that can speak into those things. And we isolate ourselves, unfortunately, to our own demise. So I'd say those two things, kind of like seek it out and go out on a limb, and it takes courage, and then test the people. Don't necessarily go to them for all the advice up front without having tested them. But as they prove good sages to you, like lean into those people.
Yeah, there was two things that I loved specifically kind of around this conversation. On page 198, he shares the story. John and his young buddies were upset by some leadership decisions in their current stage of life, and they were ready to throw this coup, this revolution, whatever. I think he called it a revolution in his story. And the sage in his life at that time, John paints this picture of how gracefully he didn't belittle these men, but offered them a new perspective and a new way to go about this. Zach, I'm really not trying to make fun of you. I'm not trying to call you like super old as a sage, but I remember probably 2021 or 2022 when I first was early on in my career at Sandals, and there was a coworker I was having some difficulty just kind of collaborating with. And I came to you of like, I don't know how to handle this. And I remember you offered a very honoring and respectful way to go about that conversation. And I had that conversation with the coworker, and it's great. Like we have no issues. We were able to sort that out. But I can remember being in a similar situation where I was like, no, I'm going to tell him he's wrong, and this is why, and X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And even in the same situation, you're able to provide like, hey, I've been here. Maybe approach it this way. Like seek some different approaches to this, because we want to fight, and that's not always the most helpful thing in the world. So I just love that story because I so easily saw myself in that, and that is a continual reminder of like, okay, there's a need that I need to like, or there's a ask I have to have of like, hey, how do I go about this? Like, there's helpful aspects.
I think that's one of the markers. Another one of the markers of like a great sage is someone who like meets you where you're at and only gives you what you need in that moment. Like we were, once again, we're talking about John Mark Comer. We were in our whatever we call it today, our conference, and he was talking about when how you explain something to a 6-year-old is different to how you explain to a 16-year-old, different how you explain to a 76-year-old.
Yeah.
And you can have different levels of feedback and hard conversation and different details, all kinds of stuff can go into it. And so like a great sage is someone who knows and understands who you are, where you are, and gives what you need in that moment.
Yeah. And one of the, poignant things I thought they shared in that today was, like when you're having those conversations, like be thinking about like what's best for them. Like what do they need? Because like so often I feel like I approach a conversation. It's like, okay, what do I need to get out of this? What do I need to say? Like what and it's all about me, and it's not all about them. And I thought it was just such a truth-filled, grace-filled, like, important point. That's like, hey, like when you're talking with someone, regardless of even maybe what it's about, like what is best for them? What did they need? Like that's, I think, the sign of maybe like a more mature person, when you're not just thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about the people around you. Like, what did they need? What can I offer? Like, what's the right filter for that?
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things I was kind of thinking through as we were talking a little offline before this, and kind of revolving around this idea that it's hard for young men to ask for help. I was particularly struck by starting on page 203, but that entire section where John shares the story of how much his grandfather would light up whenever he would sit and ask questions. He starts the section with, the greatest gift you can give a sage is to sit at his feet and ask questions.
Yeah.
I remember how my grandfather on my mother's side would light up when I asked his opinion about anything, or simply to tell me stories of his life. One thing I've had to combat personally is the feeling of embarrassment for asking for help. Is actually the exact opposite of what the sage wants. They're looking for those places to step in and offer some wisdom and some advice. But many times it's not given until it is asked for. So I was personally moved by that, and it kind of brought some awareness to me of like, okay, who in my life right now can I start to ask these questions about?
Yeah, I think like even the people that once again, I'm not, I would say, a sage, but definitely people have come to me for advice and help with things. And I think I've never responded initially with like oh my gosh, this person's asking me for help. Like, yeah, I would love to help you with whatever it is.
Yeah.
However, I would say when someone repeatedly comes to me for advice and never takes that advice, I start to get tired of like, but you're not like listening to anything I'm saying. And so I do think there is something there for us as younger people that go to sages, like listen and try the things that the sages are saying. Like don't go to advice and always do the opposite of what they say. Because at some point they'll stop giving you advice.
Yeah, there is a good reminder that you asked for this advice, so you are doing a disservice to yourself and the sage per se to not try that advice. And if you're using the same rules and guidelines of, does this point me back to God? Does this offer room for grace and forgiveness? Then you can generally kind of embrace that as like, oh yeah, this is good advice. And if it's not doing those things, then maybe it's not good advice, and seek out another sage.
And even if it's like you're not certain of it too, I think that you have to give yourself room to fail. Like, this, I'm not sure about this sage's advice, but I trust this sage, and so I'm going to try it, and maybe I'll fail, and then I can go and debrief with that sage and be like, hey, that did not work. And I've had conversations like that with people. But so much of that also helps set us up for later in life when we are sages for other people. Like, and it kind of goes with some of his other points of the book. Like, we can't just coast through life. We have to take the hard road at times and learn through difficulty so that we can offer ourselves to others.
Yeah, like how he kind of like starts to wrap up this chapter where he says, now for you younger men, don't worry much about this stage, for it will come in due time. When you're young, commit yourself to take as few shortcuts as possible. Learn your lessons, take note of all that God is teaching you, submit to the journey. And just that made me pause and think like, wow, like, okay, like I think that gives us both an invitation and the freedom to sit and listen, to try things, to fail, to not feel like we have to have the answer. And then he wraps up that paragraph by saying, hang out with the wise, living or dead, for that is how we too become wise. And that I thought was like a good way to end that chapter. That's like, you don't become a sage by taking shortcuts. And you have to submit yourself to the journey in order to even have the potential to end up here.
Right. Yeah. I love how in the chapter he kind of shared the idea that the sage, whether wounded or uninitiated, can be men that never took the journey or men that did not take notes of their journey. And we were kind of talking, I would love your guys' thoughts on this too, of just like how there's a responsibility as we are going through these stages to prepare for the stage set of life. If our goal is just to get to the end and move to Scottsdale and go golfing all the time, then we're missing out on another stage. I think he said Scottsdale exactly in the book.
Totally
Don't. I have no beef with you, Arizona. It was in the book.
It was written a while ago. Scottsdale didn't used to be as great as it is now.
But I loved that encouragement of like, don't take those shortcuts and take note of what you're learning and how these experiences have shaped you, because they can bless the generations after us. So
yeah, I think it's so important, the take note portion of it. I think there are a lot of people and men who go through life not knowing what's going on in their internal world, or why they're choosing to do the things that they're doing, or taking lessons from their failures. And those are important things for us to do. And those are what set up great sages in the long run, which is why I think there are a lot of great sages, but I think there are also too few sages, which is another reason why I think it's so hard for men to find sages to like try to ask. And it's because a lot of men, one, get stuck in a lower stage and never step into the sage, or they get to the sage platform and they just don't have a lot to offer because they don't remember. They didn't keep note. They weren't intentional about that part of their story.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking about a bit today that they, again, had mentioned in that conference, for those watching, we all sat and watched a conference today that has been very thought-provoking about, following Jesus in kind of like this age and the next. But one of the things they said was like, can you even like articulate your story and even allow people to bear witness to that? Like that was just, wow. Like, am I even thinking about how I'm looking back on my story? And am I able to even look back, articulate where God is moving, and even just let people bear witness to that, regardless of like, what I'm trying to share or say, I think is an important aspect of that. Like, how are we looking back, and whether it's being thankful or grateful or just reminded of how God has worked and moved in our life or the lives of people around us. I think that's, Scott, I think you're right. I think that's an important marker of this stage is like, can you do that?
Yeah, that's so good. Let's jump into, Danny just dropped a great question. We got a question from Chris as well. I still want to discuss something Scott said prior to this, but we'll get to that in a moment. Danielle asks, what are some of the ways you personally take note, in quotes, of your journey and what God is teaching you along the way? I know journaling is helpful for some, but not for others. Curious to what you guys do. I love the idea of journaling. I'm very inconsistent with it. My first journal that I still have, there's usually like month breaks in between my writing. But that is one way, that is the approach I would take, kind of the standard journaling. What am I learning? Where's God at inside in kind of this? But I would love to hear what you guys have.
I don't personally journal. It's something difficult for me. I've tried it many times.
Same.
But something I do is I reflect a lot on my story and my life, something that I've done multiple times is something called life maps, where you really like reflect on your life and the different things, and there's multiple ways to do it. But I'm always thinking about, the how things affected me and what I was feeling going into those things. And I try not to let difficulty go on further without it at least benefiting me in some way. And at least knowing like, okay, like this was unwise, this was hard, this was difficult. Like, try just like God works together all things for good. I think that's something we can also work on doing, is allowing our stories to work for our own benefit and others' benefit. And so a lot of times when I'm in something difficult, one of my common prayers is, God, what are you teaching me in this? Like, what is it you want me to learn in this difficulty? And I think like including him and asking him to be a part of it and revealing it to you, all the while keeping in mind that you have this story and this narrative of your life that's ever changing and ever molding. And there's things that at one point were very important, and now looking back on it, it's just not as relevant or important to me anymore. But I still have that now because I've told that story before, so it's easier to tell it again. If you never tell a story from before, it's really hard to 70 years down the road tell that story again. But if throughout my life I've been telling my story, I know my story really well. And I just reflect on my story to tell others. I would say it's like a regularity of like being able to talk about your story, tell your story, and then also inviting God into those things. Like, what are you learning and growing me in?
Yeah, I think a lot about like Pete Scazzero's book. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and he's got like a whole process that you can use to kind of like look back at your upbringing and the things that have affected you in your life. One of the interesting things that we did with a group after we had gone through that book together is we had everyone kind of like pick what were the top 10 most important events in your life. And we had them both share those and share like what they were and why they were important. So I think there's a lot of ways to do that. I think one of the things I often ask myself is like, where have I seen God moving in my life? And sometimes it's years later when you're looking back and you're like, oh man, God was really moving right there. I just didn't see it at the time. So even just like being able to sit back and reflect, I think is important.
Yeah, Scott, I'm curious, as you're telling your story.
Yeah.
Anytime you have a big retelling, is that with just yourself? Is that with your immediate family? Is it natural? Is it rehearsed? What does that look like for you?
I would say, yeah, sometimes it's in parts when it's relevant to other people and I'm in a sage moment. Other times, it's always communal. It's almost never by myself. But I do try to make it regular. Almost anytime I start a new group, I start with this. And it's such a way to bond the group together. And it lays a foundation for doing hard work together. Is I know you, you know me, we know each other's histories and upbringings and strengths and difficulties. And now we can help sharpen each other moving forward. And so more often than not, it's with someone who hasn't heard it before. And we're about to enter into some type of new endeavor or relationship or small group or whatever it may be together. And so I just want to intentionally take some time. Let's get to know each other and let's share, our stories with each other. So I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Yeah, no, yeah, it does. Totally. That's awesome, man. I want to sit through your story again.
Yeah, you've sat through it before, and it's way different now because that was probably 10 years ago. But
I think this would be the 10-year mark now. So I'm actually,
wow.
Let's go get coffee. Well, you don't drink. Well, you drink coffee.
I love coffee. Yeah.
I'll introduce you to good coffee. I'll take you to my hidden spots, and you can tell me your story.
You won't do it at Starbucks.
Absolutely not, and not another shop that will remain unnamed because we're local. Chris asks in the chat, what do you think is keeping men from entering the sage stage? Also say sage stage 5 times fast.
Yeah, that's a good.
I think generally, I won't ascribe this to all men, but I think many men reach this stage of life and it's typically aligned with like retirement and kind of, stepping out of hard work. And I think maybe we haven't had too many good examples, like you were saying, Scott, earlier. We don't have too many good examples of what a sage-like relationship is. And so entering into those messy parts of life feels like more work. That's why I think some men struggle to enter into that. It also makes me very thankful for the men that I know that are still stepping into that and have stepped into those stages with me. But that's my thought. I don't know if you guys have anything different or other reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think about my grandpa, and he retired from his like job, like he worked in education, but I never saw him retire from the church, his walk with Jesus, his family. I saw him double down on all that stuff once he retired, and so I think that like that's when I think about that question. I think about some of the folks I've seen where it's like, and again, like no hate on golf or sports or anything else, but it's like they're solely focused now on whatever their hobby is or what have you. I just like we're missing out on what they have to offer all of us as a sage. And for whatever reason, they've kind of taken this attitude that it's like, well, I put my time in, like, so now I get to retire, I get to do what I want. And I think that's kind of a bummer because, again, I think a lot of those people have so much to offer younger people, so much to share with us. And yeah, I don't know how much of that is like just like a cultural American thing, maybe versus something else. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I totally agree, Zach. I think just as much as young people struggle to ask, old people struggle to share.
Yeah.
And so like we have this like double thing happening where younger people have this burning like thing inside that they need help with, and older people have gone through that exact thing.
Yep.
Both of them think they're alone in it or feel like they don't have value to offer each other.
Yeah.
And so they stay separate. And really, so the answer is like putting yourself out there once again, like as an older person, like younger people need you. And I'll tell you, like a lot of older people think like, oh, young people aren't going to listen to me. Like I'm not hip. I don't like know the cool TikTok trends, whatever it is.
Right.
Like they don't even say hip anymore.
Yeah.
But
that's why I was laughing.
Rad. I'm gonna start saying rad again.
But the thing is, like, I really believe young people will listen to the oldest person in the room that values them.
Yeah, I mean, I think about. I'll tell you what, my wife is a real inspiration in this category to me. My wife's a high school teacher. She's been teaching for it's like 16 or 17 years now at the same high school. And just the rapport that she has with her students, like I constantly hear stories from her about conversations she's having with students that have nothing to do with what she's teaching, but everything to do about how they're living life and the questions they have about life. And just the impact, the real everyday impact that she's having on their lives just constantly blows my mind, because that's oftentimes not what, that's just not my environment. Oftentimes it's not even where my head's at sometimes. And I think Scott's right. It's like oftentimes it's the oldest person in the room who's willing to sit there and listen and care about what they're going through. I think that is some straight truth right there.
Yeah. And I would like to even say to encourage the sages or the men that are in the sage phase of life. There's room to celebrate the hard work you've done in your life. By all means, these occasions are okay. It's okay to want to go golf and do some of these things. If you have the time and the ability, invite young people into that. I would love to go golfing and that's an easy way to spend an extended period of time with someone, to have these deep and kind of impactful conversations over a shared hobby. My grandpa and I have most of our deeper conversations at a race or while working at a car, because it's something we both love and it gives us the time and the space to do something together.
Yeah.
I think it's that siloing, that separation of the old and the young that kind of contributes to that. Oh man, I'm out of breath today. We have a great question from Celeste. She asks, what are some examples of questions you would bring to a sage as opposed to what you would bring to a quote unquote expert? I would say, to give you guys a break, If it is a more technical question, I'm going to an expert. If I need my toilet fixed, I need that fixed now. I don't need the deep theological implications of fixing my toilet. I just need the toilet fixed. That is a trade more so. I am finding a lot of my need for a sage comes to my relationships and how to navigate those. A lot of my need for sage is my relationship with my wife and how to be married as we're entering into year 5. And with kids now, like our relationship's changing. There's a lot more patience required from the both of us, and I need older men in my life to help me navigate through that. So that's kind of how I distinguish between the two.
Did you say kids as in plural?
We are not pregnant, but there will be more kids. I know. I'm in the boat of have them all real close, so we just get through the worst stages at the same time. My wife almost stabbed me with a fork this morning, so we are still at just one.
Yeah, I would say take any given situation, and there's probably room for both. In that example of you fixing the toilet, maybe there was something happened where you got mad and frustrated. Maybe you yelled. Maybe you took something out on your wife because of it. I call the expert to help me fix the toilet, and I talk to the sage about how I handled the situation.
Yeah.
And so there's like this like knowledge side of things, which I think, like you said, like that's to some extent, like you need someone who is an expert at it. And sometimes sages are experts as well. And it's great when that's the case. But when it comes to like handling the interior world, I think you need to go to someone who's had to do a lot of that themselves. And that's where I would go to a sage.
Yeah, I guess maybe the phrase that comes to mind is kind of like, you can be right, but you can be wrong. And it's like how many of those circumstances I've found myself in, like those are the types of questions or circumstances that I would bring to a sage. And I think I agree with like a bit of both what you're saying. I think it's like when those things are blended, when there's like some expertise and some sage advice kind of like blended in there, some of those are maybe some of the special moments where it's like, I'm learning something from someone, but they're also giving me this like life advice, in that moment as well, that are maybe some of the most impactful.
Totally.
Yeah, that's great. Before we get to Tim's question, Scott, I wanted to address this before the show.
Yeah.
Well, because I just thought this was such a great thought. You had mentioned that you felt this was the only chapter in the book that wasn't inherently explicitly just a male role.
Yeah.
Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think the sage is a stage in life that goes across gender. I think there are many young women that need older women to speak into their lives, to help them along the way, to know what it means to be a young woman, to know what it means to be a wife, know what it means to help lead the church. Like there's so many things that only an older woman who's been through those things can properly speak into. And so I think there are both male and female sages, and I think a lot of their stuff can cross boundaries. And so I think this is a stage that is beyond just like, this isn't just a part of the male journey. I think this is a part of the female journey too.
Yeah, my grandma, if you have had the pleasure to meet my grandma, she's one of the the wisest people I know that has just fully dedicated her life to the church and more specifically to prayer.
Wow.
And so she's one person, even as we were talking about this beforehand, of like, oh yeah, she's someone that I can go to in this situation to kind of gain wisdom and gain insight from some of those things. And just like, I would be missing out if I didn't have my grandmother's wisdom in my life. There'd be a whole side of me that would not have been unlocked had she not been there, encouraging me and guiding me in some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Zach, did you have anything to add?
I don't.
We can move on.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. Fully agree.
Yeah. I love Scott's thoughts before the show, and just wanted to at least address, or at least bring some light to that of women. You have wisdom and insight that our church and that our young men need. I think they would be amiss if they did not have your wisdom.
Yeah, I think the miss would be that, like, if we aren't considering that. Like I get John's perspective in this book. A lot of it is how to grow as men, the stages in that. I think we would be amiss if we didn't consider the female voice, the female perspective, the amazing and powerful women that we've had in our lives that have also helped us. That's why I've appreciated the sections of the book that's like how to raise, with the warrior or whatever. I think that there's just as easily as much wisdom in there for women as there is for men in terms of how we're, raising our kids or helping other people.
Yeah, and I dare say a wise sage would tell you to also seek advice from women. Yeah.
I believe it. The last chapter of this book, John just kind of spends some time sharing a personal anecdote, and then also encouraging anyone that has read this book to step into those new stages, and also to initiate the young men in our lives into this. I don't know if there's much thought outside of go do the good work. We do have Tim's question as well. I'm sorry, Tim. I almost forgot about you.
I think what you just said ties in with Tim's question to some extent. And so I think to some extent, Tim, sages at some point in our lives, we do have to lead, and we have been initiated multiple times. And so we have to sometimes take that step of courage and faith and put ourselves on the chopping block for someone and make ourselves vulnerable to things. And so I think that's to some extent. I also think other sages can call up sages, like, hey, you have what it takes. You have a lot to offer. Like, young men need your voice in their life too. And so I think one of the responsibility of sages is also to call up other sages, not just also help all the people along the other paths of the journey. And to some extent, yeah, I think all of the younger stages are responsible in some way to ask of the sage. I think of as a boy, and I'm trying to discover life, I'm asking of my dad, and in that way I'm calling the sage out in him, and as I'm a warrior and I'm fighting some battle, and I go to like a supervisor or a mentor or somebody, I'm calling the sage out on them to give me advice, to guide me along the path. And so I think the way that the younger stages initiate is through that asking. That's how I would kind of answer that question.
Yeah. And I think this might be like one of the only stages where maybe like giving up something is kind of the initiation. Like John talks a little bit about like when you're moving into like the stage era, like you've now made room for another king to come in and take over or lead. I think that's something that is sometimes in a challenge in our kind of like current culture. In that last chapter, though, I thought that this is something that struck me that kind of ties into that, where he says, at nearly every stage of our masculine journey, something in us needs to be dismantled and something needs to be healed. Oftentimes what needs to be dismantled is the false self, the poser, and the approach to life we've created to secure ourselves in this world. And it's that both kind of like a dismantling and healing that where I think I see the greatest sages, where they've really like taken that to heart, and they've both learned who they are and how to care for and lead others well, but then are also willing to like, step into that kind of like coaching role, and using that to empower others.
Yeah. And I also think there's a responsibility for all of us in the different stages that we are at, that if there's a man in your life that you have the relational equity with, and you've spent time and you feel like they are not answering that calling, lovingly and graciously pull them into that and initiate them. They might be missing the person in their life to do that initiation, or they might just have fear around it. I know I'm someone that struggles with anxiety, so there is a lot of fear of these new changes and these new stages. And as much as I would like to believe that I can move myself into that next stage, sometimes I need that push from a friend or a mentor or a peer. So I think there's a responsibility for especially men in the church to care about our peers, to care about our brothers, and call each other out where is needed and when it is needed. So.
Yeah, Chris, I agree with your comment there. I think a lot of sages don't realize they have stuff to offer. And some of that is the work of the culture we've set up, where we are valuing experts over sages in a lot of ways. I would say, like, I'm not a prophet, but I would say I think we're moving into a time where sages are making a comeback. As we move into more and more distrust of institutions and organizations, people are going to rely more on personal relationship.
Yeah.
And who can they talk to learn, rather than trying to just download something from, an institution that they don't trust. And so, yeah, I think they sometimes don't realize they have stuff to offer, but the fact of the matter is, like, if you've made it that long in life, you have something to give someone. It's just, can you do it in such a way that it points them back to God, and also some of those other markers we talked about along the way.
Yeah.
I would argue the sages and just specifically Sandals Church, I'll speak to Sandals Church now. The sages at Sandals Church, you have more to offer the men of our church than whatever podcast host they're listening to. Just by offering your life and your home and your experiences to them. I see a lot of millennials turning to all of these different podcasts to figure out, some good, some bad, to figure out just what's next for their life, where they go. I mean, our team listens to the Rebuilders podcast, where Mark Sayers is someone I would consider as a sage, and we all kind of pay attention to him to see how he's navigating this and try to take that. And while that is great, some of the best sage experiences and advice I've had are from the people that are in these walls with me and walking through this life. So if you are an elder man listening to this, you from a young millennial, you have my blessing to start telling me all the areas where I'm wrong and need to be better.
I would say ultimately make yourself available. A lot of times we go to experts because they're out there and they're available to us, not because it's necessarily what we want most.
Yeah.
It's because they're easier to get to. And so if you are in that sage arena of life, like, make yourself available to those who are younger than you, behind you, in that stage. And I promise you, like, you'll start to see the fruit from that.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, like, there's a lot of younger people who would prefer to have a sage rather than an expert.
Yeah.
They just don't know sometimes, like, where to find them or, like, how to start that conversation. And so, yeah, I think those are good words right there. Like, there's a lot of people, older people out there that have a lot of wisdom to share. So
yeah, definitely. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the show today. Chat, Sandals Church friends, this is the second edition of our virtual book club. We have finished 2 books now. Hallelujah. Snaps for the chat.
2 books.
Such a great time. This will be the end of this version of our streams. We will be picking back up on October 1st for a special spooky Halloween version of the virtual book club. I'm very excited. Be on the lookout for some
spooky.
Yeah, where are your pads now, Scott?
Oh yeah, wait.
Yeah, do you have a spooky?
Is there a spooky one?
No.
Oh wait.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there it is.
Spooky, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I got pads.
Yeah, the next version of virtual book club will have a lot more production to it. So maybe we'll have a spooky tune to go along with this. But this is the end of this reading. We will pick back up on October 1st. Be on the lookout. I will send out some emails about the next edition and what that will look like. We love you guys. We're praying for you. Have a blessed day.